Consuming endless digital information requires absolutely zero biological friction. But this cheap stimulation comes with a fatal neurological tax. It permanently erases long-term memory pathways to cope with the massive cognitive overload. Society normalizes the sensation of chronic mental exhaustion. It is considered a standard byproduct of participating in the modern economy. Clinical neuroscience does not view severe mental burnout as a harmless symptom of a busy schedule. It views it as an acute neurological defense mechanism. The human brain was fundamentally not designed to process the relentless, infinite stream of digital information that characterizes the modern era. When the organism is subjected to constant stimulation without absolute silence, the cerebral cortex literally begins to choke on its own metabolic waste. The window to reverse this cognitive suffocation is extremely narrow. Every single hour an individual forces their exhausted mind to consume more digital content, the glymphatic system is actively blocked from initiating its critical cleaning protocols. Ignoring this biological reality guarantees a compounding loss of fluid intelligence and a permanent destruction of memory retention. This devastating clinical data is heavily suppressed by the global attention economy, an industry that extracts massive financial value by keeping the human nervous system in a permanent state of overwhelmed consumption. Elite global performers do not attempt to cure mental burnout by consuming more caffeine or watching motivational content. They utilize precise neurobiological protocols to ruthlessly restrict information intake and force the brain into deep zero-friction recovery. By the conclusion of this clinical analysis, the exact mechanism required to flush out the toxic neural plaque, completely eradicate mental burnout, and restore perfect memory retention will be fully exposed. The root of the epidemic lies in a fundamental misunderstanding of mental fatigue. The modern worker assumes that a clouded mind simply needs a break in the form of digital entertainment. They close a spreadsheet and immediately open a social media feed, falsely believing the change of context will provide rest. But biologically, scrolling requires the exact same prefrontal cortex engagement as analyzing complex data. The organism is no longer seeking genuine restoration. It is fleeing from the silence. The brain has been chemically conditioned to fear the absence of input. Therefore, it creates an endless loop of cheap dopamine consumption to mask the underlying exhaustion. The individual believes they are relaxing, but neurologically, they are actively pouring toxic waste onto an already suffocating nervous system. How information overload suffocates neurons. The illusion of digital relaxation completely shatters when examining the microscopic activity occurring inside a brain overloaded with information. Every single cognitive action generates a metabolic byproduct. Just as a combustion engine produces dark exhaust, the human brain produces beta-amyloid plaque during periods of wakefulness and active thought. Under normal evolutionary conditions, the brain utilizes the deepest stages of sleep and profound, zero-input resting states to open the glymphatic system. High-speed cerebrospinal fluid rushes through the neural networks, violently washing away the toxic residue from the cellular walls. But the modern information diet actively sabotages this biological wash. When a professional consumes endless data from the moment they wake up until the exact second they fall asleep, the glymphatic system is never fully activated. The neurobiological toilet is never flushed. The toxins pool heavily inside the cerebral cortex. In response to this severe, self-inflicted toxicity, the brain initiates a horrific survival protocol. Glial cells, which normally operate as the immune janitors of the nervous system, become chemically confused by the sheer volume of waste. Instead of cleaning the plaque, these cells mutate into a state of hyperactivity and begin to actively attack the synapses of perfectly healthy neurons. The brain literally begins to consume its own hardware to survive the forced digital overload. This localized cellular destruction is the exact physical manifestation of memory loss. The heavy, sluggish feeling behind the eyes is not psychological. It is the physical sensation of neurons suffocating in a bath of unflushed metabolic acid. The individual assumes they just need another cup of coffee, completely unaware that their relentless consumption of information is causing microscopic brain damage. The very neural pathways required for rapid problem-solving and memory retrieval are permanently blocked, simply because the professional refused to sit in a room without a glowing screen. The neurobiology of cognitive decay. A solid block of ice at 31 degrees looks completely stable. 1 degree hotter and it violently collapses. This is exactly how the central nervous system responds to the chronic friction of constant information overload. The profound neurological damage remains completely invisible until the exact moment the system entirely breaks. Modern professionals operate under the dangerous illusion that the human mind has an infinite capacity for data storage. They constantly consume podcasts, newsletters, and endless video feeds, blindly assuming the physical brain is adapting to the infinite load. Biology does not adapt to this level of chaotic input. It merely stores the damage deep within the tissue. Every time the organism is exposed to a new piece of digital information, the brain is forced to make a micro-prediction about its relevance to survival. This constant predictive calculation requires immense amounts of glucose and ATP, the fundamental energy currencies of the human cell. When an individual stares at a screen for 10 hours a day, rapidly switching between thousands of different contexts, the brain violently drains its energy reserves. Over time, this chronic depletion acts as a literal neurochemical drain on the prefrontal cortex. The delicate neural branches required to synthesize complex, multi-layered concepts simply run out of cellular fuel. This is the true biological cost of the modern attention economy. The individual may successfully consume massive amounts of content, but they arrive at the end of the day with a brain physically incapable of retaining any of it. The constant barrage of digital stimuli accelerates cognitive aging at a foundational level. The capacity to hold a single, unbroken thought in the mind, the very definition of elite focus, is entirely eradicated. The professional becomes biologically slower, masking the irreversible cognitive decay with even more frantic, shallow consumption. This state of profound mental burnout is clinically defined as an extreme stress adaptation. The human machine was fundamentally never meant to process the entire world's data stream while seated silently in a chair. The massive dissonance between the physical stillness of the body and the chaotic data storm inside the mind ultimately tears the autonomic nervous system apart. Why cheap dopamine destroys memory. Attempting to cure this severe mental burnout by simply switching to educational content is the biological equivalent of pouring gasoline on a burning house to put out the fire. The traditional modern worker utilizes a reactive approach, waiting until the brain is completely clouded by fog, and then applying a cheap, synthetic band-aid like a new productivity application or a stronger stimulant. Elite cognitive optimization requires a preventative approach. It acts as an internal night radar, identifying the massive metabolic iceberg of cheap dopamine decades before the collision ever occurs. Consuming endless digital information requires absolutely zero biological friction. It takes mere milliseconds to open a new tab or scroll to the next video. The human brain, evolved for strict survival in harsh environments, operates firmly on the law of least effort. It will mathematically gravitate toward the action that provides the highest neurochemical reward for the lowest possible caloric expenditure. When a professional surrounds themselves with infinite, zero-friction information, they systematically destroy their brain's reward circuitry. The neurological scale of pain and pleasure operates on a highly delicate equilibrium. When an individual constantly floods the brain with high dopamine, low-effort digital stimuli, the scale tips violently toward pleasure. To maintain biological homeostasis, the brain rapidly spawns neurochemical counterforces, deep pain receptors that aggressively demand relief. Because the organism is too terrified of silence to actually rest, it seeks immediate relief through even more cheap stimulation. The hyperactive worker attempts to escape their mental burnout by consuming the exact same digital trash that caused it in the first place. The so-called desire to stay informed is nothing more than a pendulum swinging violently between severe mental fatigue and cheap dopamine consumption, completely bypassing any state of genuine restorative focus. This constant reliance on zero friction rewards guarantees that true cognitive endurance becomes biologically impossible. The brain literally forgets how to perform hard work because it has been systematically conditioned to expect a dopamine hit every 3 seconds. Every time a new memory is formed, it requires absolute, uninterrupted time to physically strengthen the connections between neurons. When the brain is constantly yanked from one digital context to another, this strengthening process is brutally aborted. Long-term memory is sacrificed for short-term stimulation. Biological cost of zero silence. This internal neurochemical terror dictates all external behavior, and that frantic behavior actively destroys the absolute foundation of human intelligence. The clinical inability to endure absolute silence is the true cause of the modern cognitive crisis. The professional is placed in an empty room, stripped of all technology, screens, and external inputs. A fascinating physiological breakdown occurs. Within minutes, the heart rate accelerates. A profound sense of dread washes over the mind. The organism is not suffering from a lack of data, it is suffering from acute, severe dopamine withdrawal. Modern society is perfectly engineered to provide zero friction for distraction. When the environment is constantly providing external inputs, the brain never has to process its own internal state. The digital noise heavily masks the physical pain of the suffocating neurons. When the silence finally arrives, the mask is violently removed. The brain is suddenly forced to confront the massive neurochemical debt it has accumulated through years of chronic overconsumption. The unspent cortisol, the suffocating beta-amyloid plaque, and the severe adrenal fatigue all demand immediate metabolic attention. The limbic system sounds a terrifying alarm, interpreting this silent introspection as a profound psychological threat. This is exactly why the overloaded brain refuses to sit still in a quiet room. Sitting still means facing the cellular damage. To escape the terrifying reality of a dysregulated, toxic nervous system, the individual reaches for the nearest smartphone. They invent a fake emergency. They check an email. They are actively running away from their own thoughts to avoid the pain of biological healing. This avoidance behavior triggers the Diderot effect of cognitive decay. One moment of limbic panic forces a chain reaction of toxic digital consumption, which further degrades the attention span, which causes more internal stress, which ultimately requires even more information to numb the pain. The organism becomes a permanent prisoner to the noise. Reversing burnout through friction. The ultimate biological leverage is not consuming more data to become smarter. The ultimate leverage is metabolic preservation through the aggressive curation of absolute silence. Through systemic restoration of fluid intelligence and memory occurs entirely in the dark, far away from the infinite scroll. Just as a bamboo plant spends 5 full years building a massive, invisible root system underground before shooting 20 meters into the sky in 6 short weeks, the central nervous system requires profound, uncompromising rest to rebuild its capacity for elite focus. To completely halt the rapid accumulation of toxic plaque and permanently reverse the spreading brain fog, the organism must manually inject severe friction into its environment. This cannot be achieved by passively relying on willpower. True cognitive repair requires environments engineered to make cheap dopamine mathematically impossible to access. It requires the deliberate construction of commitment devices that physically lock the organism out of the digital ecosystem. Elite performers treat their mental clarity as their most sacred biological asset. They engineer their daily routines to protect their zero-input recovery windows with the exact same aggression that they protect their financial capital. We firmly understand that staring at a blank wall is not laziness. It is the highly active regeneration of the prefrontal cortex. It is the biological resetting of the dopamine baseline to restore natural intrinsic motivation. It is the deliberate chemical flushing of the glymphatic system. Consuming infinite information actively destroys the neural hardware. Mastering the rare art of profound, uncompromising silence physically protects it. The choice between early cognitive death and elite, long-term intellectual dominance dictates the entire future of the human organism. True elite status is achieved by maximizing depth of thought, not by maximizing the volume of data consumed. Clinical optimization of the central nervous system allows for hyperdense periods of analytical labor, followed instantly by deep, unapologetic digital disconnection. The individual who masters this biological rhythm will always outlast, outperform, and outsmart the professional trapped in the delusion of constant consumption. The brain must be brutally protected from the toxic information economy. The complete restoration of the neurobiological wash, the lowering of chronic cortisol, and the physical preservation of the memory synapses are the true, undeniable metrics of success. The biological machine must be respected, or it will inevitably suffocate its own mind.